Beautiful, youthful, and full of life. That was the image of a vibrant 21-year-old young woman. However, during her time studying abroad in Canada, she was brutally murdered, and her body was stuffed into a suitcase. What outraged the public even more was that the perpetrator was escorted safely back to his home country by the police. Since then, the case has become increasingly complex, evolving from a simple criminal investigation into a political controversy. And the origin of all this was a man named Li Ang. Hello everyone, welcome to Crime Documentary Files. Li Ang was born on December 20th, 1983, in Beijing. According to rumors, his family had significant influence and extensive connections. Since childhood, he lived a privileged life, free from financial worries. During high school, he was sent to Canada for his education. In February 2002, at the age of 18, Li Ang enrolled at Simon Fraser University, majoring in computer science. To make life more convenient, he and his 19-year-old cousin, Zhang Han, rented a basement apartment in East Vancouver with a monthly rent of $600 Canadian. However, the two cousins were very lazy, never cleaning their living space. Their room was filled with clutter, dirty clothes were scattered everywhere, and empty bottles and trash piled up in the corners. This situation improved significantly after a young woman moved in with them. In July 2002, Li Ang's girlfriend, Zhao Wei, moved into the apartment, bringing a refreshing change to their small living space. Zhao Wei, who was 21 years old at the time, was also from Beijing. Despite coming from a modest background, she excelled in her studies. On July 31st, 2001, she arrived in Canada and enrolled at Kwantlen Polytechnic University, majoring in English. Her relationship with Li Ang developed romantically, and they officially started living together in July 2002. In the eyes of their friends, the young couple seemed to have a harmonious relationship. However, what happened next shocked everyone. On October 9th, 2002, at 11 p.m., Li Ang called the police in a panic. He informed the authorities that his girlfriend, Zhao Wei, had left their home at 8 p.m. to buy cooking oil from a nearby supermarket. The store was very close, only about a 3-minute walk from their residence. However, after 3 hours had passed, she had not returned. Both he and his cousin, Zhang Han, had searched the area around the supermarket multiple times, but could not find any trace of her. Fearing something bad had happened, he urgently requested the police's help in finding her. Responding to the distress call, the Canadian police remained calm and responded formally, advising Li Ang that there was no need to panic after just a few hours, as most missing persons reappear on their own within a short time. They suggested he remain patient and wait at home. According to standard procedure, a missing person report would only be officially filed after 24 hours had passed. The following day, on October 10th, Li Ang called the police again, this time urgently pressing them to take action. Once the required time had passed to file a missing person report, the police officially launched an investigation. During the initial investigation phase, the authorities questioned Li Ang, Zhang Han, and Zhao Wei's friends. Throughout the interviews, everyone confirmed that Zhao Wei and Li Ang had a generally positive relationship, with only minor disagreements typical of young couples. During a media interview, Li Ang appeared highly emotional, his eyes filled with tears and his voice choked as he said, "It's all my fault. I should have gone to the supermarket with her." This interview deeply moved many people. Meanwhile, the police conducted a thorough inspection of the apartment rented by Li Ang and Zhang Han, but found nothing suspicious. Although Li Ang was the last person to see Zhao Wei before her disappearance, his consistent cooperation and positive attitude led the police to publicly announce that, after a preliminary investigation, they had ruled out Li Ang as a suspect. However, this seemingly reasonable conclusion was completely shattered in the following days. On October 20th, 2002, 11 days after Zhao Wei's disappearance, a tourist discovered an unusually heavy suitcase emitting a foul odor near Stave Lake, east of Vancouver. The police were immediately notified and rushed to the scene, where they found the body of a young woman inside the suitcase. She was barefoot, and her body was curled up. On October 21st, DNA testing confirmed that the deceased was indeed Zhao Wei. This discovery completely shifted the nature of the case from a missing person report to a homicide investigation. Based on the clues available at the time, the police initially determined it to be a direct murder. They took immediate action, searching Liang's residence that same night and questioning him for 3 hours. During the interrogation, Liang provided a critical piece of information. 3 months before Zhao Wei's disappearance, she had told him about being harassed by a strange man on her way home from school. This man had tried to engage her in conversation and complimented her appearance, but Zhao Wei ignored him. However, the man did not give up and continued following her until she threatened to call the police, which finally made him leave. However, Liang claimed he did not know the man's identity or appearance. At the time, the police found it difficult to investigate this lead. Many people questioned whether Liang had fabricated this story to conceal some dark secret. Shortly after, news of Zhao Wei's body being discovered in a suitcase quickly dominated local headlines. Facing a swarm of reporters, Liang's behavior underwent a dramatic shift. From previously sobbing and expressing deep remorse, he became unusually silent and gave vague answers to questions. This sudden change in demeanor fueled further suspicions, making the case even more perplexing. On the morning of October 23rd, the police held a press conference to update the public on the case's progress. The forensic report revealed distinct ligature marks on Zhao Wei's neck, with the cause of death determined to be asphyxiation. This revelation left everyone following the case in shock, realizing the situation was far more horrifying than they had imagined. However, just as public outrage reached its peak, an even stranger event occurred. On the afternoon of the same day the forensic details were released, Liang was spotted at Vancouver International Airport with pre-packed luggage. It seemed as though he had premeditated his departure, attempting to leave Canada while the case remained unresolved. In fact, the police had already been monitoring Liang's movements. When they noticed him at the airport, 2 officers were immediately dispatched to question him. When confronted with police questioning, Liang explained that his visa was about to expire and he needed to return to his home country to renew it, insisting he had no other intentions. Surprisingly, the police believed his explanation. Without further verification, they allowed him to proceed with his flight check-in and even escorted him onto the plane back to China. This baffling action by the authorities left everyone in shock and confusion. Local television stations reported Liang's return flight to Beijing, and the news quickly spread, sparking public outrage and widespread criticism. The police justified their decision by stating that there was insufficient evidence to consider Liang a suspect at the time, so they had no legal grounds to prevent him from leaving. However, the public refused to accept this explanation. On October 23rd, the police had already confirmed Zhao Wei's cause of death as homicide, with Liang being the last person seen with her, clearly making him a prime suspect. Allowing him to leave so easily fueled public anger and disbelief. On November 15th, the day of Zhao Wei's cremation, under immense public pressure, the Canadian police finally issued a formal response. They publicly admitted to multiple issues in the investigation, particularly the lack of communication between departments, which led to delays and confusion in handling the case. The authorities pledged to strengthen cooperation, improve investigation protocols, and work more actively to uncover the truth as quickly as possible. However, the case took a dramatic turn after a key witness came forward. On October 30th, 2002, Liang's cousin, Zhang Han, voluntarily went to the police station to cooperate with the investigation. Recalling the day of the incident, Zhang Han stated that he returned home around 4:30 p.m. and overheard Liang and Zhao Wei arguing in their room. Since such arguments were not uncommon, he didn't think much of it and went to his room to rest. However, about 3 hours later, Liang suddenly burst into his room, visibly agitated and crying, exclaiming that Zhao Wei was dead. Pressed for details, Liang recounted a bizarre story. He claimed they had been napping together earlier that day when Zhao Wei woke up from a disturbing dream. In the dream, she accused Liang of not loving her enough and suspected him of being unfaithful. After waking, Zhao Wei reportedly carried those emotions into reality, confronting him with accusations of betrayal, which escalated into a heated argument. Despite Zhang Han repeatedly asking how Zhao Wei had died, Liang refused to give a direct answer. This left Zhang Han feeling deeply uneasy, suspecting his cousin was hiding something serious. Though torn about the situation, Zhang Han's first instinct was to call for an ambulance. However, Liang insisted that Zhao Wei was already dead, and calling for medical help would be pointless, potentially landing them both in serious trouble. Despite his discomfort, Zhang Han ultimately followed his cousin's instructions. Together, they placed Zhao Wei's body into a suitcase, disposed of it, and then staged her disappearance to cover up the crime. On December 2nd, the police arrested Zhang Han on charges of being an accomplice to murder. During his detention, the weight of guilt consumed him more and more. He wrote a long letter to Zhao Wei's parents, expressing deep remorse. In the letter, he sincerely reflected on his mistakes, and at the end wrote the words, "I'm sorry," 60 times. Upon receiving the letter, Zhao Wei's parents responded, "Can saying I'm sorry bring back our daughter?" Indeed, no matter how many apologies were made, they could never bring back the beautiful life that was lost. Due to the complex nature of the case, Zhang Han's trial had yet to begin. On December 12th, after posting 90,000 Canadian dollars in bail, he was temporarily released. The case continued to drag on, and it wasn't until June 10th, 2004, that it finally went to trial. However, this court session once again left the public in disbelief, as Zhang Han was acquitted and walked free without legal punishment. The reason for this shocking outcome was a controversial move by the Canadian police. During the trial, when faced with the prosecutor's accusations, Zhang Han's defense attorney presented a surprising argument. It turned out that after Zhang Han's initial arrest, the police had sent an undercover agent disguised as an inmate to extract information from him. Although Zhang Han confessed details about the case during this encounter, the defense argued that this tactic violated Zhang Han's right to remain silent. It's worth noting that the Canadian police often used undercover tactics in criminal investigations, and this approach had helped solve numerous cases in the past. However, this time, they had clearly mishandled the situation. During the trial, the judge carefully reviewed this issue and ultimately concluded that the evidence collection method was deeply flawed and failed to comply with proper legal procedures. Furthermore, since the primary suspect, Liang, remained at large, the court ruled there was insufficient evidence and declared Zhang Han not guilty. The verdict left the public and Zhao Wei's family devastated and outraged. What made matters even more difficult to accept was that Zhang Han continued his studies in Canada without any further consequences. As the trial details were exposed by the media, public opinion sarcastically labeled Zhang Han and Liang as the best leading actors in a crime drama. Tragically, Zhao Wei's grieving parents were left with no choice but to keep writing letters to the Canadian government, pleading for justice and the arrest of their daughter's killer. Now, let's return to the primary suspect, Liang. Based on Zhang Han's earlier statements, the Canadian authorities knew Liang's whereabouts in Beijing and formally requested the Chinese government to arrest him. In February 2003, Beijing police apprehended Liang and asked Canada to provide evidence of his crime for prosecution. However, the Canadian authorities failed to comply with the request. Ironically, it was Canada that initially requested Liang's arrest, yet when he was finally detained, they refused to cooperate. Moreover, since no extradition treaty existed between China and Canada, legal barriers further complicated the situation. What should have been a straightforward murder case turned into a prolonged and tangled legal struggle. The reason Canada refused to provide evidence against Liang was primarily because they believed the crime occurred on Canadian soil and that China should extradite the suspect to face trial in Canada. Some members of parliament argued that handing over case documents for prosecution in China would compromise Canada's sovereignty and national dignity. However, Chinese authorities insisted that since both the suspect and the victim were Chinese citizens, China had the right to prosecute the case and firmly demanded that Liang be tried in Beijing. This stalemate left Canada unable to extradite Liang, while China, lacking sufficient evidence, could not press charges. The case fell into a deadlock. On May 12, 2003, Canadian authorities officially charged Li Ang, who was still in China, with second-degree murder. However, due to insufficient evidence, Beijing police were forced to release Li Ang on bail pending trial. 3 months later, Beijing authorities again requested Canada's cooperation, hoping to visit the crime scene themselves to collect further evidence, but this request was once again denied by Canada. As time passed, the investigation slowed and eventually faded from public attention. However, for Zhao Wei's family, they remained trapped in the shadows of this tragedy. Her parents continued to contact both the Canadian police and the Ministry of Justice, pleading for justice and demanding Li Ang's arrest. Sadly, their letters went unanswered, disappearing without any response. By August 2007, 5 years had passed since the crime. Due to mounting public frustration over the lack of progress and to accelerate the case's resolution, Chinese-Canadian MP Guan Huizhen, along with 3 other parliament members, held a press conference and launched a petition campaign. They urged the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Justice, and the Ministry of Public Safety to take decisive action in this prolonged case and deliver justice to the victim's family. It's difficult to imagine the unbearable pain Zhao Wei's parents endured during those years, grieving their daughter's death while facing endless heartbreak and frustration. Fortunately, with the support of Guan Huizhen and the local Chinese community, funds were raised and assistance was provided to help Zhao Wei's parents secure Canadian visas. On October 6, 2008, Zhao Wei's parents and other family members traveled to Canada, meeting with senior officials, including the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Minister of Justice. Following this meeting, Canada dropped its insistence on extradition and agreed to transfer the evidence to China, on the condition that Li Ang would not face the death penalty, as Canada had abolished capital punishment in 1976. The Chinese authorities agreed to this condition. However, while both countries were negotiating and handling legal procedures, the central figure in this case, Li Ang, quietly changed his name to Li Jiaming. He married a woman named Yuan Rui Shui and even had 2 children, living a comfortable and fulfilling life. Whether it was due to his powerful family influence or his cunning nature, after settling down with his family, Li Ang and his wife mysteriously disappeared without a trace. Justice prevailed after relentless efforts by the Beijing police. After a lengthy and challenging search, they finally located Li Ang, who had changed his name and was hiding in Tibet. Perhaps he believed that only by escaping to the border regions, far from the public's outrage, could he find relief from his overwhelming fear. However, as the saying goes, the long arm of the law is inescapable, even if justice seems delayed. In July 2009, with the cooperation of the Tibetan police, Li Ang, now known as Li Jiaming, was arrested in Tibet on charges of intentional homicide. After over 2 years of delays, Zhao Wei's case finally went to trial on September 20, 2011, at the Beijing No. 1 Intermediate People's Court. However, the court decided to hold a closed trial, only allowing the parties involved, family members, and legal representatives to be present in the courtroom. To prepare for the trial, Li Ang's parents spared no expense in hiring a renowned defense attorney, often referred to as the top criminal defense lawyer. In contrast, Zhao Wei's parents had no such resources, relying solely on their faith in justice. Reports indicated that tensions were extremely high on the first day of the trial, with fierce confrontations and heated arguments erupting frequently. Li Ang's father even shouted from the gallery, claiming his son was innocent, while his mother insisted that all the evidence against him had been fabricated under coercion. However, the prosecutor presented a series of solid pieces of evidence to refute these claims, including the testimony of Li Ang's cousin Zhang Han, DNA evidence found on Zhao Wei's body, and the suitcase used to dispose of her remains. After a year-long investigation, on September 27, 2012, Li Ang was found guilty of intentional homicide and sentenced to life imprisonment, permanently stripped of his political rights, and ordered to pay Zhao Wei's parents a total of 1.3 million yuan for funeral expenses and compensation. Following the verdict, Li Ang's mother was unable to accept the outcome. She tearfully declared her intention to appeal to the Beijing Higher People's Court to clear her son's name. Just over 2 months later, on December 4th, 2012, the court heard the appeal. During this hearing, Liang altered his testimony, admitting that he had killed Zhao Wei but claimed it was an accident. He stated that they had been playfully pillow fighting when an unintentional mistake caused her to suffocate. However, this narrative directly contradicted the earlier forensic findings, which confirmed Zhao Wei died from strangulation. After another exhausting wait of a year and a half, the final verdict was delivered on June 30th, 2014. Shockingly, the court accepted Liang's revised testimony, believing his explanation of accidental death during a pillow fight. As a result, the initial conviction of intentional homicide was overturned, and the charges were reduced to manslaughter due to negligence. His sentence was reduced from life imprisonment to just 7 years, while the financial compensation of 1.3 million yuan remained unchanged. However, to this day, Zhao Wei's parents have yet to receive the compensation they were promised. Following the controversial verdict, Liang seemingly disappeared from public view. However, in 2023, his name once again resurfaced in the headlines. His photo was even published in the New Zealand Herald. But why was he back in the public eye? To understand, we must go back to the year 2016. Liang had been in custody since 2009 and was released in 2016 after serving 7 years, which included his time in pre-trial detention. Therefore, following the appellate ruling, he had effectively served less than 2 years in prison. Many media outlets speculated that his move to New Zealand was due to difficulty finding suitable employment in China. However, this explanation seemed unlikely, given his influential family background, where securing employment wouldn't be a challenge. Even without a job, his family's wealth would have ensured his financial stability. The real reason for his departure was more likely the lingering public backlash from his past. However, when Liang applied for a visa to New Zealand under the name Li Jiaming, it was rejected due to his criminal record. Yet this obstacle posed little challenge for the powerful Li family. Using their extensive connections, they managed to have his name changed once again, this time to Li Zongyuan, with a falsified birth date allowing him to obtain a new passport. Under this new identity, he traveled to Europe for a month in 2018 before returning to China without issue. In June 2019, using his new identity as Li Zongyuan, he successfully obtained a tourist visa for New Zealand, seemingly testing the waters for possible immigration. He toured New Zealand for a few days and was pleased with the peaceful atmosphere, the mild climate, and, most importantly, the fact that no one there knew of his past. Soon after, he also obtained tourist visas for his wife and children. Not long after, Li returned to New Zealand, with his family reuniting with him 4 days later. Upon settling in New Zealand, Liang applied for a student visa, which was approved in November 2019. A month later, he enrolled at the Southern Institute of Technology, Invercargill campus. By December 2020, Liang and his family relocated to Auckland, where his parents purchased him a home in the city center, further solidifying their comfortable lifestyle. Currently, Li Zongyuan, formerly Liang, has temporarily established a stable life. However, this temporary identity was not a permanent solution. After graduating, he sought to secure permanent residency by applying for asylum through New Zealand's immigration department. This time, however, things did not go as smoothly as before. When filing for asylum, Liang claimed his wife was still a student, his 2 sons were attending school in Auckland, and he was unemployed because his visa did not allow him to work legally. He also alleged that Chinese agents had been threatening him, claiming it was due to his support for Tibetan unity and his conversion to Christianity. Liang went as far as stating that these agents disguised themselves as his classmates and teachers in New Zealand to intimidate him. He even cited an incident where his youngest son accidentally fell as supposed evidence of retaliation. However, after investigating his claims, New Zealand immigration discovered that Liang had previously been denied a visa under the name Li Jiaming 5 years earlier due to his criminal record. When confronted with these discrepancies, Liang, in an interview with the New Zealand Herald, adamantly denied any involvement in Zhao Wei's murder. He insisted she was still alive but in hiding, claiming that all accusations against him were fabricated and part of a conspiracy. Liang explained that he and Zhao Wei were in a romantic relationship at the time, but she wanted to break up and didn't know how to express it, so she chose to leave and never return. Upon hearing this explanation, New Zealand immigration suspected that Liang might have mental health issues and requested that he provide a psychological or psychiatric assessment. In response, Liang submitted a handwritten letter from a church staff member who had previously worked as a nurse at a psychiatric hospital. However, immigration declared the letter invalid, stating it was not sufficient for a proper mental health evaluation. Meanwhile, Canadian MP Guan Huijin was informed by Zhao Wei's mother that Liang was applying for asylum in New Zealand. Zhao Wei's mother urged both governments to intervene and prevent him from being granted protection. She also wrote a formal complaint letter, which was forwarded by Guan Huijin to New Zealand immigration, urging them not to be deceived by Liang's fabricated claims. Following this, New Zealand immigration conducted a comprehensive review of Liang's case and released a report, ultimately rejecting his asylum application. The report highlighted that since Liang's initial entry into New Zealand, he had provided authorities with a series of falsified documents, frequently changing and contradicting his statements. For example, he had listed 2 different places of birth, 3 different birth dates, and possessed 4 separate passports. Based on this pattern of deception, immigration concluded that he would not be a trustworthy citizen. Despite the rejection, Liang remained defiant and outraged. He publicly declared, "I will sue immigration. I will stay in New Zealand no matter what." Shortly afterward, he managed to submit a petition signed by 1,315 New Zealand citizens, urging the government to allow his family to stay in the country. This unexpected development caught many by surprise. Naturally, people began to wonder why so many New Zealanders supported Liang. Was he truly so beloved there? Of course not. His previous escape to Tibet wasn't merely about avoiding legal consequences. His influential family connections played a significant role. Upon arriving in New Zealand, Liang quickly made contact with individuals involved in pro-Tibetan independence movements. He participated in multiple events under the guise of activism and took numerous photos during these protests. After his asylum request was denied, Liang reached out to the Tibetan community settled in New Zealand, seeking their support. By now, everyone has likely understood the origin of that petition. This move was carefully calculated, a strategy planned long before he ever went to prison. If he hadn't been caught in Tibet, he would have relied on his family's influence to settle there. After all, it's a vast and quiet region where he could have lived undisturbed. After a few years, when public attention had faded, he could have returned to mainland China. However, since he was arrested, he served his sentence in Beijing and then left the country for a fresh start abroad, with his quality of life hardly affected. His plan was to first apply for a student visa and then use his experiences in Tibet as leverage for a political asylum claim. Sadly, Zhao Wei's parents and those who continue to seek justice can only watch helplessly as the primary perpetrator walks free, untouched by the law. Currently, Liang's case is still under judicial review, and we will continue to monitor its progress. Sometimes we don't need to overthink the true meaning of justice. In a globalized world, when someone tries to escape the crimes they've committed, can they ever truly find a safe haven? Even if they can, as the sun sets and the night falls, can they truly find peace when reflecting on their dark past? This story may not have a perfect ending, but it serves as a reminder that every choice, every injustice, and every attempt to evade accountability leaves a trace somewhere. And one day the truth will inevitably rise to the surface. That concludes today's video. Thank you for watching. See you in our next story.